questions. So the purpose of this meeting is to ask these people up in front any questions you have on the agreement. In the March 17th meeting, there will be a warrant article asking the people to appropriate money and enter into a 3-year contract with the Belknap County Sheriff. So on the 17th of March, we'll be discussing, most likely heavily, this warrant article and decide what we want to do. What I would like to keep in mind tonight, if this is for information. So if you have questions of all these people that have assembled up before you, this is the time to do it. I'm sure come March 17th, the same questions will probably be asked again. But I'd like to stay away from getting into the debate saying those numbers are wrong, these numbers are right. I'm not going to cut anybody off, but keep in mind if we start getting into a town meeting type discussion and argument, maybe somebody won't get their questions answered. I'm going to call on everybody at least once before I go back and start calling on a person a second time. If you have a question for, say, the sheriff, and he's up, or the chief is before you answering questions, I'll probably then ask, is there anybody else that has a question for the sheriff? So that we don't have people getting up and down, up and down. Does everybody understand these very basic rules that I've laid out for the meeting tonight? And if you can't hear somebody, please ask them to speak up. If I can hear them here, at my age I should be able to, all the rest of you should be able to hear. But if we have to use the mic, it is available. I've already talked to the selectmen. They didn't have any presentation to put forth. Did anybody else up on the front have a presentation they wanted to give before we went into questions?
Before we talk about a presentation, can I just point out that we've got 2 microphones here for purposes of the video camera, this one and this one. That microphone over there is for the PA system here in the room, where people can use the microphone, that microphone, and these will pick it up and we'll have a good recording of this. If anybody wants to view and listen to the video recording afterwards, I'll have a copy of this over at the Selectmen's office.
Okay. So I'll open it up to for the public to ask questions of the panels that are up before you.
Can we do the presentation?
Oh yeah, if you want to do the presentation, yeah. Sheriff, go ahead.
I think that will open up, maybe answer a lot of questions.
Yep.
So it's 4 lines, water.
Yeah, you got it.
We have the microphone. Thanks.
This is just recording to the camera, right? There we go. Okay, can everybody hear me? Great. I'm pretty loud, but I don't want to record this, so we'll record this. There's a bunch of familiar faces here from the last couple of public meetings and some new ones, so thank you all for coming. I'm Craig Wiggin, I'm the Belknap County Sheriff, in case you didn't know that. I'm headed into my 5th year as a sheriff. I have over 30 years of law enforcement here in New Hampshire. Most of that was with the state police. With me tonight are a couple people who have been very instrumental in communicating information back and forth with the select board and with the police committee. And one of them is Deborah Shackett, who was the county administrator. This handsome gentleman next to her is Glenn Waring, who is the county finance director. Glenn is the numbers guy. He's the guy that if we need to put a budget together and work finances, he's the one that does that. The other handsome gentleman on the other side of Deborah is Lieutenant David Perkins, who's a Barnstead boy, by the way. If you recognize his name, his father was the police chief here a number of years ago. Lieutenant Perkins is the second in command of the Sheriff's Department. He's the operations commander. He oversees all of the divisions of the Sheriff's Department, and I can explain to you a little bit about how that works. What we're proposing to do is add something that we don't have right now, which is a dedicated patrol division. we still perform patrol functions at the Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff's Department is a full-service law enforcement agency with statewide law enforcement authority to serve criminal and civil process. What differentiates us from a local police department, or even the state police, is we have the authority to serve court orders, writs of the court, orders of the court, and civil process, and make arrests in civil cases as well as criminal cases. So when people ask what is the difference between the Sheriff's Department and another police department, that's really the only essential difference. Sheriff's deputies are full sworn, certified, trained police officers, have to go through the same process that any other police officer in the state goes through. And we're bound by the same regulations and laws that any other police agency in the state of New Hampshire is bound by through the Police Standards and Training Council. So just so there's no misunderstanding about any differences or any similarities that there are with the Sheriff's Department and a local police department. So one of the things that the Sheriff's Department has been doing for many, many years is we provide communications and emergency dispatch services for your police department. If you call the Barnstead emergency line, one of our dispatchers at the communications center in Laconia answers the phone and communicates by radio and or by telephone with the on-duty police officer or police officers, and they dispatch calls in that fashion. So back at the end of 2009, I was approached, and the first gentleman who approached me was former Select Board Chair Jim Barnett, whom I've known for many, many years. And we started some discussions about whether or not it would be feasible for the Sheriff's Department to provide dedicated full-time law enforcement services for you folks down here in Barnstead. And over the last almost 2 years now, well over a year and a half that we've been talking about this, we've evolved to where we are today, where a warrant article is going to be placed in front of you at town meeting to decide whether or not you want to initiate contract law enforcement services with the county through the Sheriff's Department to provide your police services. So how are we going to do that? As we said, the Sheriff's Department is perfectly capable of providing patrol services to the town of Barnstead. We'll talk about the logistics of how that would work if in fact you decide you want to do that. One of the things that was expressed to me repeatedly, especially in both of the public meetings that we were at, some of you I know were at those public meetings, was what's going to happen to our existing staff? The full-time people are going to be absorbed into the Sheriff's Department. Right now you have 4 full-time police officers. Even though you've been staffed or budgeted for 6, you haven't been up to staff, and that's basically been because of relatively frequent turnover. That's not unusual in small towns like Barnstead, but it's very difficult for the police department to maintain its full staff of 6 people that you have previously been budgeted for. I'll talk about where I came up with the numbers, where these discussions that led to the numbers of people in a minute, and answer some questions from you that we have. So essentially what we're doing here is entering into a contract with the county to pay an annual fee. Instead of budgeting for your municipal police department, you would be paying the county, and that would coincide with the tax billing year. And the logistics of that I would let Glenn or Deb answer if something was way above my head. But if you were to vote on this at your meeting in a couple of weeks, we would implement a contract that would take effect July 1st. And the police services would be turned over to the Sheriff's Department as of July 1st. So, but before I get ahead of myself, essentially again what we would do is we would absorb the chief and the existing full-time staff of the police department. They would be appointed sheriff's deputies. They would become county employees. They would transition immediately from the Barnstead Police Department to the Sheriff's Department. For all intents and purposes, the police department would cease to exist. So those personnel would continue to do what they do now. That is to provide law enforcement services to you here in town. The only difference is the color of the car and the color of the uniform that they wear. They would still be assigned to the same duties. They would be dedicated to providing patrol and law enforcement response services to the town of Barnstead 24/7, 365. So in other words, if Chief Borgia happens to be working, we're not going to be sending him up to Center Harbor or New Hampton or making prisoner transports all over the state. We have other people that do that now and who will continue to do that. Okay? They would be dedicated to providing police services to the town of Barnstead, just like they are now. They would be accountable to the to the command staff, to our supervisory staff, and the lieutenant, and to me. And sheriff's deputies are appointed by the sheriff. I'm personally liable for the actions of sheriff's deputies, so I certainly have a vested interest in how they comport themselves and how they go about doing their business. So that's essentially what we would do. Where did the number 4 full-time officers came up with? Well, obviously, we wanted to put a proposal together for you folks that made some economic sense. And that meant looking at how can we do the most with minimum resources. Everybody is economically challenged. Barnstead is no different. So we have to look at other ways of doing things. So what we're going to have is a core of 4 full-time people. The chief already supplements his department with part-timers. So if he has an open shift because somebody calls in sick or is on vacation or has to go to training, he utilizes his part-time staff. They cover the town, right? You know many of these part-time officers. You've dealt with them. We would utilize part-time deputy sheriffs and probably primarily full-time deputies from other parts of the sheriff's department. We come down here to Barnstead all the time. I don't know if you know that or not, but we're down here all the time. My deputies know their way around Barnstead because they're down here serving civil process. We come down here and assist the police department with criminal investigations, with accidents, and with other cases where they need additional resources. So we're down here all the time. So what that means is that if Ken Borgia is the supervisor, which he's going to be as we make this transition, and he needs to call on somebody to fill a shift because somebody is called in sick or there's an emergency or we need an extra person to come down here and patrol the town of Barnstead, he's going to have the entire sheriff's department to call from, okay? And we've built into the budget overtime for backfilling those vacant shifts. So there's not going to be a situation where you're just not going to have anybody here. If you pick up the phone and call the police department, a deputy sheriff is going to come. And just as the situation might exist today where that deputy might be tied up with an arrest or could be otherwise occupied on a call, if it's an emergency situation, we're going to continue to do what we do today, which is we'll call the surrounding agencies. That includes the state police and say, hey, look, we have an accident or we have a serious call here in Barnstead. We need somebody to respond. And under mutual aid compacts, they respond. That happens now. In case you weren't aware of it, it happens all the time. And it will continue to happen with us. So again, the only thing that's going to change is the color of uniforms and the cars that eventually these folks will be wearing. Other than that, you're not going to see any change in service. We would utilize the existing police department for a sheriff's department substation. If you need to meet somebody to file a report or speak with a deputy sheriff, they will meet you there, conduct business just like they do right now. The town will continue to own that building and maintain that building. Okay? So again, other than the change of where these people are working out of officially, i.e. the Belknap County Sheriff's Department, absolutely nothing will change. So again, they will continue to provide the same level of service or more because now with the Sheriff's Department, we have resources that are simply not available to a small town police department. They can call for them now, but by virtue of the fact that they would be in the same department, it changes the whole dynamic of how quickly you can get things done. Okay? So they would attend and provide security at local events. They'll be here at town meeting. They'll be here at election day, Old Home Day, any special events that you require police presence for now, they'll continue to be here. Again, they'll just be wearing a different uniform if in fact you decide you want to do this. They're going to be a very visible presence in the community, and my feeling on this is if you would choose to do this, after a few weeks, this would simply kind of blend off into your back office memory, and you wouldn't really think twice about it. This happens all over the country. Some of you that were at previous meetings, you heard me talk about this before. We're not reinventing the wheel here, folks. This is done all over the place. If any of you go to Florida, you look at how large the sheriff's departments are down there, and they cover pretty much all the unincorporated areas, and they contract with small towns to provide police services. California's been doing it for years. Maine does it. It's done on a smaller level even here in New Hampshire, over in Cheshire and Sullivan County, where they pay, the towns pay a fee to the sheriff's department to provide dedicated service. I haven't done anything quite as elaborate as what we're talking about, but again, this is nothing new, okay? So you can expect, again, professional law enforcement services from the sheriff's department if you choose to initiate this contract. Deborah and Glenn were kind enough to go through the most recent budget numbers, which have changed several times. and that is because your budget committee has been working. Obviously, the chief presented the budget, the selectmen went through that budget, your budget committee went through that budget. We have gone through and looked at our proposal for dedicated personnel, with cruisers and equipment and all that other stuff that goes along with it. And the cost for the first full year of service would be about $441,000, as you can see in front of you. That's about $120,000 less than what's in the warrant article for the current police department budget. So as I mentioned earlier, we would make this transition effective July 1st, so we would prorate this to 6 months, and that's roughly the cost of the first 6 months, and that includes startup costs. You've got to buy new cruisers this year, folks. If you haven't seen the proposed warrant article, you got to replace some cruisers. You've got several cruisers that have 125, 140,000 miles on them. You've only got one vehicle that's in really good serviceable condition. They've got to be replaced. So one of those vehicles, which is a newer vehicle, we would simply transition over to the fleet, and we would lease 3 new vehicles. We're able to get good deals on municipal leases through Ford. That would include the startup equipment, uniforms, the initial training that we would get everybody up and running with, and everything else that we would need to get them established within our organization. So these are the numbers which Deborah just looked at again today, and as best as we could, looking at the way the town lays out its budget versus the way the county lays out its budget, that is the translation. So if you look at the left, the initial, again, the first year proposal, that includes $6,000, which you're going to pay anyway, which is in Chief Borges' current budget for maintaining the existing building. So as you can see, that appears on both sides of the equation, that $6,000 budget item for the maintenance and the upkeep of the existing police station. Okay? Our proposal for the 4 officers with all the equipment and all the other associated costs is, as I mentioned, is just over $441,000. Your warrant articles 7 through 10 lay out a difference there of $81,600 because you've added an additional officer, right? Correct on that number? Oh, that's a separate warrant articles for the capital expenditures, which you would not be voting for if you vote to contract with the sheriff's department, because we'll buy that equipment. The budget that the chief has proposed, or actually the budget committee has proposed after the chief submitted his proposal, is for 4 officers at a cost to you of $486,833. And that's all of your existing costs that will continue if you decide to vote for that. Did I miss anything there?
No, I just want to say that if you add the budget of $486,000 plus that $6,000 in building costs, that's the total recommended by the budget.
Thank you. If you didn't hear what Deb said, that's what was recommended by the budget committee, and then you add again, as you mentioned, the building costs, which are going to continue anyway. Okay. So we'll go through this and then ask any questions. We need to back up to some of those slides, and we can certainly do that. We were asked to project things out because I'm going to be perfectly candid with you. This is not a sales pitch, folks, okay? We're simply trying to present to you realistic numbers here so that you can understand that we're not just trying to get your business. I have no reason to get your business. We've been asked to provide you a service at a certain cost, and these are the numbers that we came up with, okay? So you need to understand that these are estimated numbers, best estimated numbers, using Deb and Glenn's mind in the financial world, anticipating things like if the legislature, and Representative Swinston is here, if the legislature changes retirement contribution rates, okay? That's going to change the cost. You'll be paying that anyway. We have to pay it as well, and obviously that cost is passed down to you folks. Other things that are beyond our control that we can only guesstimate at this point in time, things like health insurance. We all know what a big ticket item that is, and the county is struggling with that just like municipalities are to try to maintain costs on that. Gasoline. You've all watched the news about gasoline. If gas spikes up to $4.50 a gallon here and stays that way, we're all going to have to budget more next year for gas, for fleet, fuel oil, for the building, cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, the caveat is that these are best estimate costs that we can lay out to you here as we stand today. But you can see the difference between what is in your proposed budget versus what is in our proposed contract for year 2. And that's using those estimates as best as we can. So, I think this is the last slide that we wanted to keep it short, sweet, and simple. Thank you very much, Pedro. Here are the pros. As you can see from the numbers, it would save you money. It would save you some tax dollars, about $120,000 in the first year. As we've mentioned a couple of times, the Sheriff's Department is a much larger organization. We have over 50 people. We have special units, which includes detectives and uniquely trained investigators and accident investigators and reconstructionists and specialists in various disciplines that the Barnstead Police Department simply does not have. And again, it's no different than a lot of small police departments. They simply don't have those resources. So we have an established organizational structure and the support behind it to supply law enforcement needs down here 24/7, 365. There's absolutely no question in my mind that we can handle anything that Barnstead throws at us. I pride myself on professional accountability and development. We engage in a great deal of training and career development with our folks. It's very, very important that your police officers are well-trained, well-disciplined, that they know what they're doing, that they're professional, that they're polite, that they're respectful with the public, and that they know how to do their job. You'll get that with anybody that works for them. Along the same lines, get access to better equipment and resources. We just simply have more of a cover. The town is not going to be assuming that direct liability for the operation of the police department. They will be insured by the county. The county would have to manage the liability because they're not going to be your direct employees. You're paying the bill for them. They're going to be our employees, and we're going to be responsible for them. And that includes insurance, liability, workers' comp, all those other assorted costs that go along with having employees. Stability for employees. This is very, very important. One of the things that small towns suffer from, and again, Barnstead is no different, is you tend to be a stepping stone, starting point for young police officers. It's hard to attract people into this job today as it is. Not a lot of people feel it appealing to go out and work nights and holidays and weekends for not a lot of money and put yourself at risk, working in some of the most difficult conditions, and then be held to an extremely high standard. As you all know, you put on one of these things and you're instantly living in a fishbowl. Your personal life is no longer your personal life, and you're very highly accountable. And it's tough to attract people under the best of circumstances. One of the things that we have the benefit of coming from a larger, better structured, better resource organization is a much lower turnover rate. I can attract people who will stay. We don't have people leave the organization. They stay for a long time. You tell me you've been there, what, 14, 13 years? 11 years. We have 16 years in law enforcement. We just had a sergeant retire with 31 years in, another one with 28 years in. The last time we did a deputy sheriff's posting, we had 36 or 37 applications, and almost every one of them was a certified police officer looking to move from one department to our department because we offer more. So the turnover and the stability, which the chief has been dealing with for years, having people come and go, that's going to be drastically minimized, I can assure you. Looking long-term, capital projects, if this were something that were to stay in place, we don't need a large full-service police office. We need a police facility somewhere where you folks can come, where we can process arrests, where we can interview people, where they can go in and do paperwork, make phone calls, that sort of thing. But you don't need a large, elaborate police station. So for the purposes of strategic planning and capital long-term planning, that's something that comes into play as you think about the town's expansion needs. And as I mentioned a couple of times, this is an existing model. We're not doing anything really out of the box here, folks, except for small town New Hampshire, which has stringently guarded its independence and the small town rule. That's really the only thing that's different, is that you will be turning this over to the county entity, to me and to us, and entrusting us to run a professional, efficient law enforcement operation. And it does work well. It is cost effective. There's study after study after study that's been done that demonstrates that contract policing and regional policing, this isn't quite regional policing, but it's the first step towards regional policing, that it's much more cost effective and that it delivers much better service for the citizens. So it's much more bang for your buck, to use that well-worn expression. So, I get you other question.
Just a comment. We have the county attorney, which has a prosecution, which means that we might not need our own prosecutor, which would be the savings.
Well, the county attorney prosecutes felony cases for any Barnstead police arrest anyway, because that's the role of the county attorney. Their office does that for all law enforcement agencies in the county. Where it comes into play is the district court with violation cases, motor vehicle cases, and misdemeanor cases. We have deputies in court every day of the week, and we have 3 people who are assigned to prosecutor duties, and they rotate those duties around. One of them is a specialist in juvenile prosecutions, and she helps out the local towns already. So one of the things that you would not have is somebody having to go up to Laconia to handle routine prosecutorial matters and leave the town, which the chief has been doing for the last number of years, until you recently hired a prosecutor. So yes, there will be a savings there. You would not need to hire an outside prosecutor to handle those district court matters in Laconia. We would be able to do that seamlessly. So can you back up one month and we will get to that. We'll go to the card on the right-hand side. So some have said these are cons. They're just observations and things for you folks to think about in the interest of being transparent and very candid. The town is going to give up how this operation gets run. The selectmen are not going to control the deputies. The day-to-day operations of the police function here in the town is going to be up to me, to us, and to the county. You're not going to be able to dictate those employment practices. These folks are going to become part of the county employee family, if you will, and they're bound by the rules and regulations of the county, the rules and regulations of the sheriff's department, and the town has absolutely no influence over that. Okay? So that's something that you need to know right up front. You're not going to be able to alter the budget. Okay? How we implement the day-to-day operations of the budget, unlike what the selectmen can do now, they can come in, call the chief in, move money around in line items. That's going to be up to us to do up at the county level. And I work very closely with Deb and Glenn. We communicate almost every day. And obviously we're looking at budgets. The county's budget is tight. Deborah will tell you that I've never gone over budget. Never. Not even close. I'm pretty fiscally conservative. But I also get the job done. And it's a matter of prioritizing things, making sure that the right things are getting done, and if necessary, you have to be flexible and make changes. But the overall control of the budget by statute is the responsibility of the commissioners. So where I do answer to the commissioners is with respect to the budget. And all that gets run through Deb's office, and Glenn is the guy with his eyes on the budget. If this contract is terminated, we need to stop and think about this and think about it long and hard. Let's say 3 years from now, we decide we want our police department back. We want to bring all these people back. Think about the manpower or person power and the logistics and the expense of doing that. Now, anything that we buy, but by the way, we're going to talk about this, but I think I need to make this point. There's going to be a separate budget outside of the sheriff's department's budget, because a number of people, some of whom don't even live down here, have made an issue that this is going to cost other taxpayers and other parts of the county money to police your town. No, not the case. There's going to be a supplemental budget with the numbers that we just laid out here to run the day-to-day costs of providing you police services down there. The rest of the taxpayers in Belknap County are going to continue to pay what they pay now for the rest of the sheriff's department's operation, as we've always done, because we're talking about providing you dedicated, specific services 24/7. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And what we'll have to do is we, the county, if you approve this, is we will have to come before the commissioners, who have already lent their full support from day one to doing this. Because many folks said to the commissioners in these county conversations, "Hey, what can the county do for us?" Well, this is one of the things that the county is saying we can do, and we can do it for this amount of money. If you choose to do it, again, you folks are paying the bill. This is your decision, and you've got to decide what you think is best when it comes to something as critical as law enforcement services. And so I certainly urge you to think long and hard about it. But if this contract is terminated, you're going to have to go back and rebuild your police department. And even though any equipment that we've bought with your money is going to come back to you, you're going to have to do things like buy cruisers, paint cruisers, hire people, hire new people from the ground up, and build and rebuild your police department from the ground up. So that is something that, I don't know if it's a con, but I think it's certainly something that you need to think about in the event that you dissolve your police department and turn this over to us. So, do we have one more? Okay, so a lot of people have asked, what about the contract? What's the contract going to say? The police committee that worked very hard, and Alan Glassman is here, and Gordon Preston are here. They put a lot of time into this. We met numerous times and talked about a lot of the logistics. We talked a lot about what the contract should say. We have some ideas about how to word the contract. I've looked at contracts from other states and other parts of the country. And what we'll need to do, if you pass this warrant article, is we will have to get the attorneys together and draft a legal document that covers all these contingencies, make sure that everybody is happy with that, and then the board would have to sign off on it, and the commissioners would have to sign off on it. And but there's no sense in us drafting a contract if you decide that you don't want to do this. So that will be the next thing to do. So legal counsel will take a look at it. If everybody's happy with what the contract says, then we'll sign the contract and implement the contract and make it happen. I've already met with Chief Ward, and I talk all the time. We met with the members of the police department, giving them an idea of if in fact this happens, the logistics of how we would make this transition. And we obviously would talk a lot more about that long before July. And but there's no question in my mind, if you folks say yes in a couple of weeks, that we'll be able to have this fully ready to essentially, for lack of a better term, flip the switch and have the Sheriff's Department provide you those law enforcement services starting in July. And again, I'm confident that if we were to get this up and running, I'm sure we'll have some bumps in the road, but we'll work on those. And I'm confident that you'll be happy with the service that would be offered here, and we can deliver professional law enforcement services to you for a little less money than you're paying now. And but again, it's your town, it's your decision. No one's trying to force anything down your throat. We were asked to see what we could do. This is a proposal that I think gives you reasonable coverage. And I said I would get back to where I came up with a number. By virtue of the fact that we dispatch for you folks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I can go on my computer and I can look at the dispatch statistics, calls for service statistics, which I do quite frequently. And I've looked at the call for service and the types of calls that you folks get down here in Barnstead, Barnstead Police Department gets. I've looked at day of the week, time of day, time of year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm confident that with some flexible scheduling, we will have police officers down here on duty, on patrol, when you need to see them. And just as the chief has had to do, because he's been forced by manpower limitations to put people on standby, you put people on recall to duty. And if somebody needs to come out, they'll come out, and they'll handle a call, they'll come out immediately. If it's an emergency situation, we'll invoke mutual aid, just as the chief does now. Call one of the neighboring towns, wherever the call happens to be, Pittsfield, Alton, state police. I have lots of connections with the state police. I know if I call, I'll get an answer and they'll come. And all those agencies work together now. They'll continue to work together. And my vision for this is that it could be relatively seamless. But again, it's a decision you folks have to make. You're the taxpayers, you're the residents down here. And all I can tell you is that I will pledge to you to work very hard to be available for any issues that come up. One of the things that the police committee talked about putting in the contract is to have a regular review committee to meet if in fact this is implemented monthly initially, I believe, right, Alan? To talk about any issues that come up. If anybody's unhappy, all you got to do is call me. If you call me, I will return your phone call. If I'm not there, I will call you back. And if anybody's unhappy with the service that's delivered or a specific problem that they have, just as you would call Chief Fortune now, you can call me, and I can assure you that we'll talk about it and straighten it out. So, with all of that, I'm happy to entertain any questions about the budget proposal, about the logistics of this, and answer any questions that you may have.
Does anybody have any questions for the sheriff? Just raise your hand.
You asked me that question already?
Actually, this isn't for you, Sheriff. One of the gentlemen sat here, he touched on the subject. Mr. Vince, who sat on our committee, is a contract lawyer. Now, he didn't write this contract, but what he did do extensively, in conjunction with the county, is what we want to be in, what Barnstead wants to be in a contract. Now, I was fairly relaxed because Mr. Vince is not connected with the county, he's a Barnstead taxpayer, but he's also a contract lawyer. So he drafted what kind of things we want in it. And this isn't a question, but I see there's a reporter here. I would love you to publish because I keep seeing letters in newspapers accusing the county, the sheriff, everybody else of making a grab to increase their power. Would you stress in your next thing, Barnstead, Selectmen, myself, and others approached the county. This wasn't a grab for anything from the county. We met with them way back to see if this was feasible. And the impetus came from the town, looking at ways we can save money, because I think the economy is going to be down for another, I don't know how many years.
Okay, back, we have the sheriff up here. We were looking for questions to the sheriff first, before we got into anything else.
Ah, my apologies.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I would just like to see a correction. He is speaking. Wow. I'd like to see a correction. This is not regionalization. Nothing to do with regionalization. This is just going over to the county. We're not going into the other town. We're just going in with the county. That's the only correction I'd like to see, because I keep on saying that we're going to regionalize. We're not. We're going to the county.
Okay. Any other questions for the sheriff?
That is for the sheriff.
Well, it's more like a statement.
How does the cost of the first year of 4 officers go from $441,290 to down the second year to $430,290?
Because we won't have those startup costs to buy uniforms and equipment that we need to buy.
All right, thank you, sir.
Okay, more questions for the sheriff? Yes, ma'am.
Janine Byers. I just have one question. You did say that the Barnstead, I just want to get
Sure.
go over. I'm sorry, right here. Just a quick question. You said that the chief was going to go over.
Can't move it.
Microphone don't work.
It's like American Idol.
Just a question for you. You said that Ken is going to go over as a supervisor.
Right.
Are all the officers going over with a 1 year, when they put them on a probationary?
Yes.
For the 1 year, that includes him?
Yes, because although he's all technically he's a part-time employee now, any full-time employee like county personnel will be subject to 1 year probation. They know that.
more questions for the sheriff while he's up here? If there's no more, okay, yeah.
Do we state our name?
Yeah.
Yes.
Frank Rowe. Did that, the budget for the police department include the part-time officers and the part-time secretary that's not going on?
No.
That's just the 4 full-time officers? from the
Yes,
budget?
and it includes overtime for additional coverage with part-timers and full-timers.
No, I mean the police budget, on the police side?
Oh, I believe it did, yes. You'll have to ask the chief, but I believe
Okay,
so,
so it
yes.
wasn't just the 4 full-time?
That's correct.
Okay.
There's another question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Kevin Christensen. I just wanted to know, is this contract with the county?
Can't hear
Is the contract with the county? Or if the sheriff changes, will it be audited with the next sheriff?
Yeah, it'd have to be. It would be with the county. There's a financial obligation here, so the commissioners have to sign off on that, and that would carry on.
My name is Carol Troy. I'll yell now. Well, one of our concerns is years ago we had voted on 7 officers because we felt we needed that coverage. And now one of our issues is we can't retain officers, so we're down to 4. That still leaves us with only 4 officers. So we're having existing coverage, but really our concern is having enough coverage, and we're down by 3 from 4 or 5 years ago.
Yep.
So how does this work? What if our town decides we really want 7 officers covering?
Okay. I'll hire more deputies and I'll send you the bill.
So the costs aren't really very specific. So if we decide...
Oh, they're very
if we
specific,
decide-
actually.
We decide we want 7.
Yep.
That includes purchasing the uniforms, and or do you just hire more sheriffs? Right, have more sheriff's officers.
We would hire more if they were going to be dedicated to the town of Barnstead. And again, you folks are paying the bill. It would be no different than if you hired an additional police officer, and you've got to do the math on that. To hire a police officer out of the chute, let's say he or she is not trained. First year cost, average first year cost in New Hampshire with background investigations, academy training, field training, uniforms, equipment, cruiser, all that sort of thing, is about $150,000. That's your real net cost of hiring a new police officer. So one of the things that Chief Borgia has been struggling with, if I advertise for a deputy sheriff at a significantly higher rate of pay with an opportunity for advancement and to do other things, and he advertises for a patrol officer down here in Barnstead at the rate of pay, and pay's not everything, but where do you think they're going to go? They're going to go to an agency like mine. So you're going to continue to incur these costs if you continue to run the police department the way you've always run it. I can't say it any more bluntly than that. And a lot of small towns make that mistake. It's kind of it's short-term thinking, and it really is an investment in people, and it's an investment in your town. And then you've got to think about the quality of service that you're going to get. So, yeah, you can have more police officers. The chief's budget was cut by the budget committee significantly, simply because of your current economics. It's a matter of trying to do more with less. What we'll do is some creative scheduling, which I have a lot of experience in, to provide adequate coverage down here, and make sure that we respond to any of your emergency calls in a very prompt and very efficient fashion.
So our contract for that first year would be 4 officers, that's it. And we would have to wait to go back to town meeting again.
Essentially, we would have to renegotiate year to year as far as what you folks want. And if you want more coverage, we'll add more personnel. And we can also add more coverage without necessarily adding more full-time people. We can add overtime pay without benefits and salaries, without benefits and without all the other costs that are associated with that. So in other words, I could pay an extra deputy sheriff to come down and work a shift as opposed to hiring a new body, if that makes sense to you. So it may be simply a matter of saying, okay, we're going to give you X number of hours of coverage. There'll be 2 deputies on, for X number of hours a week or an average hours a month. And we can do that in a much more cost-effective way because I have those people on staff already. The chief doesn't, he has to hire them. So that's one thing that we bring to the table that is just limited here by your current police department. Just sheer numbers.
Based on your reports that you see every day, and we're kind of middle of the road for what we have problems out here. Is that part of the basis for four?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. No,
Amanda Savage. My question is from the fire department standpoint. We also have medical calls middle of the night. We often have a police officer first on scene. Are we going to have to wait 30 minutes until one of your officers shows up from another town?
No, not necessarily. I mean, look at what the chief is working with right now. We're not talking about slashing the numbers of police officers. Really, you're not going to notice much of a difference.
But what I'm saying is that, like, you know, at night, if you don't have someone right in town, are we going to have to wait until someone comes down from, say, Guilford?
Are you talking 11 o'clock at night or like 4 o'clock in the morning?
Like 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, it's going to depend. I mean, if it's a weekend night, and we'll do lots of different things with the schedule. Mix it up, make it very unpredictable, but also look at call volume and when do we actually need somebody out there. So could that happen on occasion? Sure, absolutely it could. It can happen now. So it could happen on occasion. Absolutely.
yes, ma'am, you had a question?
And kind of dovetailed into her question was, are they going to be out of this police station? So if they get a call, are they responding from here? My husband and I own a store in Maine. We experienced this type of police force, and I can tell you with the sheriff and the state police up there, I could have been dead behind the counter before anybody got there. I've waited an hour for a call. So will they typically, if they're on shift, be in this station?
They're going to be in the town. Yeah, they're going to be here. Yeah. If they're on shift and they're working, they're going to be in the town of Barnstead. They're not going to be running around the rest of the county.
More questions for the sheriff? Yes.
This lady over here just mentioned that we haven't not able to keep officers, and I was just curious, do we know why?
Well, I touched on it a little bit, and I mean, maybe the chief wants to pipe up. Some of it's pay, some of it is you have a small police department with limited resources. If you hire a new police officer who's all full of, you know what, and vinegar right out of the academy, eventually they're looking for career development. They want to become an investigator. They want to get on a SWAT team. They want to be a canine handler. You know, they want to specialize in certain types of investigations. Small towns simply don't have those opportunities available. We do. We have room for growth and room for career development. And surveys have shown that it's not always the money. So it's not simply money. Frankly, Barnstead is somewhere about mid-range salaries for towns of comparable size in the state of New Hampshire. So it's not just necessarily the money. But if you're a young police officer and you're looking spending 25 years or more in this career, are you going to come to a small town in Barnstead and stay here for 25 years unless there's something tangible to offer you? The answer is almost always no. And every small town suffers that. It's really difficult to get somebody who's a good fit and will stay and make a career out of a small town, just being a patrol officer their entire career. Some folks are happy with that, but they're the minority and not the majority. That's why a lot of them move on to larger agencies.
Sir?
Any more question?
Actually, I'd just like to supplement Sheriff Wiggins'
Okay.
answer. I'm Alan Glassman on the police committee, and in answer to your question, the committee was also interested in finding out why there was the turnover that we've been experiencing. And so one of the things that we recommended in our report was that a climate survey be conducted, which is a survey of the police department that includes interviews of current officers, of officers who have left, reviewing the actual operation of the police department to determine how it's being run and the reasons for the turnover and what things are being done well and what things aren't being done well. And that was, I guess that was a company called MRI I'm not sure what it stands for.
Municipal Resources Incorporated.
Okay, I think they're out of Merritt, is that right?
They are.
And so that's a report that the selectmen ordered, and we're waiting for publication of a study, the results of that study.
Okay. Any more questions for the sheriff? Yes.
If we bring Chambers, if one of our officers would go up ahead and we need a new officer, would somebody from this area have some priority to beyond the sheriff's department? In other words, right now, they're going to take their cruisers home if they're on the sheriff's department. Well, right now, most of our police officers will be living in Barnstead. But in the future, will they be 30 miles away from their home, or will it be mostly, I understand, 30-mile radius around the town? And is that requirement going to be the same here? Or are we going to have somebody living in Meredith running here, you know what I mean? Just to hire our local people that we're going to have right now. If one of them leaves, do we hire somebody from Meredith, or do we get somebody from this area here?
Well, if somebody from Barnstead is qualified and they already know the town, all other things being equal, I'm certainly going to hire that person.
Is there a mileage from distance from home?
No, they have take-home vehicles, but you have several officers that don't live in Barnstead, in case you weren't aware of that. They don't live in town now. One of them lives in Guilford.
You don't have a circumference mileage that they have to be?
I require people to live either within the county or in the immediate proximity to the county. And all of your existing personnel live either in the county or the immediate proximity to the county. A couple of them live within spitting distance of the county line. I have another deputy that lives just in the Merrimack County by about 500 yards, and it's not an issue. But I'm not going to hire a deputy sheriff and allow him or her to commute back and forth from Portsmouth, for example. Right. That makes no sense to me. So if they're committed to the job, they're going to be committed to the county, and specifically committed to the town of Barnstead. Now, just as what happens now, if there's an emergency call, we're going to get the closest police unit there, no matter what time of day it is. And we all have limited resources, and we have to call mutual aid on a regular basis now. So that really isn't going to change a thing with respect to responding to calls. And as far as one of the things that you get with the sheriff's department, the whole package of the sheriff's department, is you get the supervisory structure, you get the command structure, you get all the resources that we have they're available to the town now. But and as I discussed with the chief and his people when we met, one of the things that changes the dynamic is if it's your department, you're going to be much more quick to make that call, less hesitant to say, hey, I need some help down here, because it's somebody within your existing department, if that makes sense to you all. So, there's going to be ownership of the county here in the town of Barnstead, because we're going to be responsible. I'm going to be responsible for making sure that your law enforcement services are met.
Any more? Yes.
Bruce Gray. One of the questions I have, you have 21 patrol periods in a week. Out of this, how many are actually going to be patrol periods for you? How many will we actually have police officers on patrol out of those 21 shifts?
It's going to depend. It's going to depend on the time of year. Obviously, do we need as many people out there at 4 o'clock in the morning tonight as we do in July or over July 4th weekend? So there's a lot of changes to the schedule, Bruce, and the chief and I have already talked about some of that stuff. There are some creative ways with 4 people to really expand your coverage. Also utilizing our existing staff. If there's something going on down here, if he calls and says, hey, I need another deputy down here, it's Ocho home day, I can pick up the phone and call, the lieutenant can pick up the phone and call, and we can have a deputy down here in 10 minutes. And so he has to scrounge for extra people. I don't. So if there's a major event, a major incident down here, you'll get the entire sheriff's department if you need it. And that's really not going to change.
Any more questions for the sheriff?
I have one for Mr. Glassman. Mr. Glassman, did you not come to the selectmen's meeting I'm sorry, Judge Parsons. Come to the selectmen's meeting and ask about your report, and wasn't it said to you at that time that the report was in and that the selectmen would review it and you'd be able to pick it up in 10 to 12 hours? And the second part of that question is, on that, were there only 2 ex-police officers that were actually interviewed? I thought there were supposed to be 4 or 5 that were supposed to be interviewed, and it ended up there were only 2 officers that had been interviewed. So doesn't that kind of skew the results, and how true is it?
Okay. Actually, I'm going to defer to the Board of Selectmen to answer that question, because they were the ones who made the as far as the release of that report.
Do we have any more questions for the sheriff? If not, I'd let him sit down. Let's hold, huh? No, let's hold that and finish with questions of the sheriff, and then I'm going to open it up and you can start asking the committee. Yes, go ahead.
Chris Carrazzo, question for the proposal. I see you're only asking for 3 cruisers. What's the life expectancy of your cruisers? I remember you gave us that information, but it slipped my mind to answer that one.
You talking about the take-home leased vehicles?
Yeah.
If all goes well, 4 to 5 years.
And then you want to go into a 3-year contract with the town. So why wouldn't you do the 4 vehicles, not the 3, so you're on a complete cycle instead of that oddball vehicle that you've already had for 2 years?
What are you going to do with it? It's already equipped as a police vehicle, so it made a lot more sense, and Chief and I talked about this, just to absorb that vehicle and also save you some money.
But doesn't
that vehicle's already paid for?
Wouldn't that come out of cycle with the rest of the vehicles?
Yeah, that's not a big deal.
And also in our warrant article, we are proposing for command vehicles for other departments in the town. So there is a need and a use for that vehicle in the town. So that's why I was just curious why it wasn't a full 4 vehicles fully equipped with officers, etc.
Well, you got to remember that's got police equipment in it, including a prisoner cage and a LawNet radio that has to stay with the police agency. So if you wanted to keep it, we'd have to strip all that equipment out of there, which would cost anywhere between $500 and $1,000, and install it in another vehicle. It made no sense to us to do that.
Jim Bernard built a Tahoe back in '97, which has just been taken out of the service from the highway department, which has been utilized in Town of Barnstead since the day of the purchase. Now we have to take some equipment out. I'm just saying, looking at apples for apples, I mean, we're in crisis and everybody needs vehicles, and if you were to do an agreement, why wouldn't we do 4 and 4 so all 4 cars would cycle out at the same time, is all I was questioning.
We could. We're trying to save you some money, and you're the first one that's mentioned to me that there was a critical need for that vehicle, and we looked at the cost of stripping that vehicle and putting that equipment in another one, and if there's another command vehicle, the town probably ought to just buy it or lease another command vehicle, because that's going to be cheaper than stripping this one down and then reinventing the wheel by replacing it. But, you know, again, trying to save you a few dollars where we can.
Okay, there was one more hand up.
I'd just like to ask you, basically, I really don't know where this is all coming from, but as you bringing on the police department, the Town of Barnstead, the sheriff's department, what is the benefit of that for us as the Town of Barnstead? Because there's been a lot of issues with the town police in the Town of Barnstead for many years. And I don't know if you know the history of Barnstead or not. You went to the sheriff's department man when I was at the selectmen or anything else.
I was a trooper here for a long time.
I realize you were. And I know him for a long time. Well, you might not know me, but I do. But because there's been a lot of issues with the Barnstead Police Department for a lot of years in this town. And when I was a selectman, I went to the sheriff's department, I went to state police, I went to every law enforcement agency I could think of. I actually was in tune with the state of Maine when we went through the process of getting rid of the police department up there, when we voted the police department budget completely zero, and they brought in the state police to take over the police enforcement in that town. And I'm just asking you, it's like, I've heard you say this before tonight, that you're not trying to invent the wheel, but there's a lot of baggage you're bringing into the sheriff's department that I don't understand the reasoning behind all of this. I just would like to know an answer that we're going to get real enforcement in the town of Barnstead, and I'll give you an instance where I have called the sheriff's department to come and look at an incident that happened with me, which the town of Barnstead was involved, and the sheriff's department wouldn't get involved with the town of Barnstead because it happened in the town of Barnstead. The town of Barnstead should be involved. And I have real deep reservations with you taking on the police officers from the town of Barnstead and not having a clean slate here where we have police protection that the people are confident in, that they can go to and talk to and have issues resolved. And that's what I'm asking you.
Well, I don't know if you were here before, Brett, or not, but what I said to you, to everybody earlier was, if you have issues about service and you're not happy, pick up the phone and call me. I'm not bashful, and we'll talk about it. You may not like the answer, but I'll give you an answer. But as far as baggage goes, if you're talking about personnel issues, I'm not going to get into that tonight. I'm not going to talk about personalities, or if you're unhappy with some particular person on the police department. What I heard loud and clear from just about everybody down here, in several meetings that I went to, was they didn't want anybody from the police department, especially the full-timers, to lose their job. And I didn't get into this, but I will now since you brought it up. These guys, I don't use guys and gals, it's all guys right now, the core group of people that are down here now know this town. They know the citizens here, the citizens know them. For us to make this work, it made no sense to anybody to bring in brand new faces and start from scratch. You may have some history there. We can talk about that offline if you want to. But my thought was, why not utilize the expertise and the experience and the knowledge of these guys who know your town a lot better than I do, because they've been working here for years. And, you know, we build upon that. You also got to remember that things change. People retire, people get promoted, people move on. That would happen with your existing police department. It's going to happen with us as well. Somebody will retire, somebody might get promoted. We bring in a fresh face. That fresh face has to learn the town. The one thing that I will tell you, Brett, is I hold people accountable. I hold them accountable. And if they're not doing their job, then I'll deal with that. That's the best answer that I can give you without getting into a lot of specifics about history. So we can talk.
Thank you very much.
Okay. If that's the questions for the sheriff can sit down and we'll go on. Joyce, you had a...
Well, Mr. Glassman said yes, the selectmen.
Wait until Mr.
Oh,
the
I'm
sheriff.
sorry.
No, sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just would like to know, I was at a selectmen's meeting on Tuesday. Mr. Glassman arrived. He asked the selectmen if they had received the report for MRI. The selectmen said they had. They said they would look it over and it'd be available for you in 10 to 12 hours. You're saying you do not have it tonight, and I understand that in this report there were only 2 ex-police officers who were questioned at all, instead of a larger list of them as was originally suggested.
Okay, actually, Joyce, my answer was that I didn't say anything about whether I have it or not. I simply said that I was going to defer to the Board of Selectmen to respond to that because they were the ones who made the commitment. And so that's where the answer should come from.
From that, when we went back, I called MRI. The report that we got was a draft. That was a thing for us to go over.
Speak up, please.
Microphone?
Yeah. Hello.
Thank you.
All right.
Wasn't a first sergeant for nothing.
I noticed. We called MRI, the man in charge of it, and he said for us to look it over, make changes of what we wanted in it, and he would send us the full report. But the report is not to be released until we get the full report and everything is ironed out.
When do you expect to get the full report?
I'm going to start pushing him right away. So.
And I'm just curious, why would we pay for a report, a company to come in, evaluate us and give us a report, and then the selectmen would make changes before it was issued?
No. He said to check and see if there was any errors or anything that we wanted that was in there and how it was stated. And when we do that, we can look over it and then say, how come this isn't in it or how come that isn't in it? And he will do it. I know you'd like to call that I've said it wrong. I happen to be French. I say things a little wrong sometimes.
Okay,
Wow.
hey, let's keep it
Something that
information.
serious.
Yes, sir, you had a question
Yes.
for people?
Is there a reason why the town isn't able to see the draft? Because don't you think that's kind of important before it's changed?
They will see the draft. It's just that we haven't gotten a full draft. We just got a draft. We got the draft and we haven't got the full report of it yet.
The final
Right,
report.
right.
Let's discuss.
It's, Chris, it's my understanding that the draft that we have is the final report, that our purpose of looking at it was to find out if there were the wrong figures used or the pages were out of order or something like that. Personally, I see the report as finished, and it's fine with me personally to release it. So it's up to the rest of the board members to
We have a
Go along with
commission,
that.
we're asking to put an awful lot of time and energy into, and this report would be a lot of good information to give the people, and we're coming up on town meeting, and to hold that report back and not give the information to the people is a shame, especially after we paid for it.
Okay. More questions for anybody up on the panel? Any general comments that people would like to get off their chest? Yes.
The only comment I want to say is per 91A, the right to know law in New Hampshire, it has to be released, both drafts have to be released to the public.
Any other questions from the public? Yes, ma'am.
I do. You guys work so hard to get the fire department under your control. Why do you suddenly now want to turn the police department over to somebody else? I mean, you had a very expensive lawsuit. Now all of a sudden you want to turn another department over to someone else. And not one.
Who do you want to address that question?
Select board in general, I guess.
Are you trying to mix up the fire department and the
No,
police
I'm
department?
not. The select, the whole town works so hard to get the town, to get Barnstead Fire Rescue Inc. out of the picture.
This is a totally separate...
It's not.
Yes.
It's not.
Yes, it is. I was
Why
one of the selectmen.
why you want to send your
Yeah, may I answer
be
you?
managed by
Okay, hey, let's calm down. Okay. If you ask a question and then let somebody answer it, ma'am.
I was involved in both. As a selectman, one of the problems clearly was that the Barnstead Fire Rescue non-profit company had very, very little accountability. Yeah, I mean, we got a chunk of money, we handed it out, and at the end of the year...
Let's stick with the issue
no,
at
it is
hand
not
now.
the same thing.
We don't want to go over the fire.
I'm just trying to say
thing
that
again.
they're nothing to do with each other in the problems that we were facing and trying to solve, and the problems we're looking at with this issue and trying to solve.
Okay. We're here to ask questions about, yes, go ahead, Chris.
Chris Trazo, if I understood the chief, deputy, the sheriff. His budget is, there will be this much money and we will have no say. That's the same thing what you just said. So it's kind of a similar thing, because we have no control over pay raises, no control over any of that stuff. The town of Barnstead will pay this amount of money, that's it. Contract.
May I?
No, the next gentleman over had his hand up.
Comments on the committee. The difference is that we're talking about a contract with the Sheriff's Department, actually a contract with Belknap County, to provide police services in a fixed amount of money. We know exactly what we're going to get for the money that we're going to spend. What's happened in the past is that the town has approved budgets for well over $600,000, and we've spent less. And so when we sign a contract with the county, if the town decides to sign a contract with the county, we have a fixed amount of money for police services, and we get the officers that are listed in that contract. With pretty much any other line item budget that's managed by the town, if the town approves 7 police officers, you can't hire them. If the town approves 7 road department employees, and you can't hire them, that extra money isn't going to be spent for that, but we're taxed on it, we're assessed on it, and it's collected by the town. Now, in the past, it's been fortunate that there was some surplus in the police budget because of some of the disasters that have happened in the town. But the big difference is, with a fixed price municipal services contract like the sheriff's talking about, we know what we're going to spend and we know what we're going to get for that. And that's actually accountability that we don't have with a lot of the departments because of a lot of the variable conditions that we can't control. So that's the difference that I see.
Okay, go ahead.
There's another issue, Chris, the committee did talk about, precisely that. There are variables here. It's not going to exceed that number. That we know. It's a fixed contract. However, there's an overtime line which could be used. It could not be used. We discussed with the county, if that isn't used, i.e. it's underspent by a small amount, we talked about the fact that the county can't hand you money back. They don't have the accounting method. But, and this is where it gets down to the legalities of the contract, it can be applied against next year's contract. Because we're going to have complete accounting like that, which we've not had in other circumstances. Does that help an answer?
Yeah, I was just understanding that he says we can't dictate anything with his department. He's going to run it, which I respect that. But to relate to her question, we are releasing control of our department locally to give it to him to let him do it. That's all I'm saying. It is similar in its own way, but there is accountability on his end because he has
Yeah, very much so.
I'm also an elected official.
Oh,
Every 2
go
years,
ahead,
I
Al.
decide whether you want me to keep doing my job or not.
I'd just like to add a note to this, and that is that if there's another way to look at this, and that is that we're talking about the police department versus the sheriff's department. We're talking about that right now we have Chief Borgia running the police department, and he reports to the selectmen. What we would be shifting to would be shifting to Chief Borgia reporting to the sheriff and to his lieutenant over there. So the bottom line is we're actually shifting from the selectmen overseeing the police department to the sheriff overseeing the police department. And as Sheriff Williams just pointed out, he's an elected official. The selectmen are elected officials. There is control that the electorate has over who gets elected. So if you want to weigh this, it's the sheriff, in essence, versus, not really versus, but as opposed to the selectmen. And you can make your own decisions about, who you want to be policing, how you want the policing to be done, how you want it to be overseen. But that's the choice that's on the table right now.
Okay, question. Yes, sir, in the back.
That having been said, are we saying that as part of this contract, we will always have a primary person that's dedicated to the town that is directly interactive with the sheriff's department?
Good.
No, I'm talking about one dedicated person that is a conduit of information from the town directly to the sheriff, disregarding who the individual is.
Yeah, it'll be a supervisor.
Yes.
Something's bothering me here. The MIRI report, many officers who have left the town were asked to respond. Only 2 responded, but I don't know how you know that if you haven't seen the report. I haven't seen the report.
Okay.
I haven't seen it. But you said you know that only 2. But how would that rumor get out if no one, my report, I know where it is, so.
Walk around the town office. That's all you gotta do.
And ask the police officer who will
And-
ask questions.
Any more questions for the panelists? Yes.
Yeah, Kevin Christensen, I just wanted to know yearly who would present what the sheriff's department budget will be to the town?
I will, with assistance from my able colleague here.
Okay.
Okay.
I think the only way we could affect that is to re-elect the commissioner and get to them to get to you, right? Is that correct? No, I'm talking to your money person here.
Oh,
To
yes.
get the commissioners to get to you. That's the only way we can do it.
Right, the whole process, the public hearings and all
Right,
of that,
right,
yes.
through the commission.
Right.
Other than that, we have no say whatsoever.
That's right.
Right.
Okay, any other informational questions? Because we're going to have our town meeting on the 17th of March, and I'm sure this will get at least a couple hours of discussion. Okay, I want to thank everybody that came out tonight. I have one announcement to make. The Board of Selectmen will be returning to the Town Hall after this public hearing to conduct the remainder of their business meeting. And I'm declaring the meeting over at 7:20, Karen.
7:20, thank you, Chris. I'm wondering.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well, I think he does feel it, and I think he sees it. But he was, there was. Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask him. Well, I'm something that you've done about that. Well, I'm going to ask him. We have confidential records. You are very welcome. We have confidential stuff in there. Well, we do. But if he's walking around reading it. But it isn't anywhere else, Ken. I gave each of you guys he's getting it from somebody else. And the only other place that it's in is email for him. But he keeps it. I know, and I'm going to ask him where it was. But maybe we need to call him up and find out where we're getting it. I'm going to ask him because I'm the only one that distributes it. So, absolutely. And that's why I'm going to ask him. You can't say things like that in public. When it gets to a personal level, it's not business. Right. It's personal. And I don't like it.